The second inaugural is noteworthy because it's very, very, very short. Inaugural addresses tend to be these sprawling pieces that celebrate the platform of the elected. The second inaugural, along with the Gettysburg Address, are both inscribed into the Lincoln Memorial, in part because they're great speeches, but also, practically speaking, they're very short, so you can actually etch them onto a memorial. The third paragraph of Lincoln's second inaugural, for rhetorical scholars, is the most noteworthy. As you can see here, I won't read the whole thing, but I've indicated the verb tense in the first couple sentences. You can see that Lincoln switches from the past to the present, and that is strategic and rhetorically significant. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with, or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph, and as a result, less fundamental and astounding. And then he switches to the present. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. That switch is really, really significant, as I'll talk about here in just a second. And then, of course, the famous line that it might seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. What an amazing, arresting use of language. But let us judge not that we be not judged. Lincoln is not being sarcastic there. It might be tempted to say, yeah, he's really sticking it to the Confederacy, the vanquished, soon-to-be vanquished Confederacy. But he's not. He's saying, look, it might seem to us to be morally certain on our position here, but let us be careful in judging. Well, Michael Leff was a famous rhetorical scholar, one of our best. And he said that what Lincoln was doing here was an example of creative equivocation, blending the historical present into a conception of the sacred present. Right? And we saw that with the change in the verb tense. According to Leff, there's a tone of passivity and self-effacement. Why would a president who had just wrangled his way ingeniously the 13th Amendment, right, and got it passed right before his inauguration, why would a president sort of be self-effacing? This Leff indicates there, Lincoln creates the impression that the occasion commands him and it renders him captive and passive. According to Leff, the North and the South were made to accept a war they sought to avoid. We heard that when Sue was talking about Jefferson Davis. And to suffer consequences they did not anticipate. The speech sort of indicates the limits of human action. You can see here that this is the ending of that particular paragraph. You heard the last couple lines performed in that clip. But it's interesting how Lincoln here talks about that we simply don't know. Right? He's telling his audience, God's motives are inscrutable. Right? Both sides invoke the divine to justify their cause. Both sides are disappointed. Both sides feel remorse and loss and confusion. This is what I like about the second inauguration, because it gives us this myth of Lincoln as being this superhuman orator who had this moral sense that surpassed the moral sense of all of us in this room combined. It wasn't true. He was just another human being trying to be brave amid very, very trying circumstances. A religious man trying to make sense with religious language of this situation. The very last line that you heard Daniel Day-Lewis perform. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, even though we might not know what they mean. Right? That's a very complicated and sophisticated message to be sending to the electorate. Right? That requires a lot of reflection and thinking and asking a lot of your audience. You see here how Leff responds to that. And I think this is just a masterful reaction to that. That he says essentially that the war, that both the North and the South need to atone. Both the North and the South need to reflect, to think on their sins, to use the Shakespearean language. For invoking the divine on behalf of their particular mission. You can see it in italics right in the middle there, that all have participated in this mysterious relationship between man and God, which renders men responsible for their acts but unable to control their results. He's talking about being vexed. In a way, this is a type of agnosticism, right? Now, Lincoln believes in God. He believes that God exists, but he's almost agnostic in terms of interpreting what his message means. And I think, again, that's a very theologically and philosophically sophisticated message to be relaying to the electorate. I like how Left puts it there that the war itself is a judgment from a higher source and a redemptive vehicle that opens the path to unity through spiritual rebirth. And this is what Lincoln is attempting to do. After his death, Meditations of the Divine Will is posthumously published. And in it, Lincoln affirms these conclusions. It says, look, that each party claims to be in accordance with the will of God. Both may be and one must be wrong. God cannot be for and against the same thing at the same time. In the present Civil War, it's quite possible that God's purpose is somewhat different from the purpose of either party. This is Lincoln basically acknowledging that he's been invoking God on the trail, on the campaign trail, and from the pulpit of the presidency for years. And he's not quite certain if God is, in fact, behind him. Walt Whitman, one of my favorite poets, and I think that there's a chance that if you continue this series that some professors will be discussing, including Montana's poet laureate, the poetry of the Civil War in a couple of weeks. So be sure to come back for that. But Walt Whitman, in an essay, memoranda during the war, wrote these words, and we'll conclude with these words in an image here. And in a way that only Whitman could, he writes that after every great battle, a great storm, even civic events the same. I couldn't help but thinking of the government shutdown. We're going to have blue skies. On Saturday last, a forenoon like whirling demons, dark with slanting rain, full of rage, and then the afternoon so calm, so bathed with flooding splendor from heaven's most excellent sun. No one else could write this but Whitman. With atmosphere of sweetness, so clear it showed the stars long, long before they were due, as the president came out on the Capitol portico. A curious little white cloud, the only one in that part of the sky, appeared like a hovering bird right over him. I've been haunted ever since Sue told me about this opportunity that we'd have to speak before you about this particular essay and that clip, the idea of a single cloud in the sky hovering above Lincoln. It made me think a lot about sort of how coalitions are so fragile. That all these ideas sort of a cloud is a coalescence of elements in a fragile configuration. Right? A coalescence of elements in a fragile configuration. Like the Union. Right? Held together just literally by a prayer. Right? A cloud can dissipate just as quickly as it can form. Like Lincoln himself. If you think about his wife suffering from mental illness, the loss of their child, all that was weighing on Lincoln, the cloud, in a sense, is like a lot like us. That we're composed of all these elements that are held together very, very fragilely. And again, I return to the idea of our current government. Democrats and Republicans deadlocked about the issue of the budget, right? The debt ceiling. It reminds me of a cloud, right? Hopefully a cloud will form, right? Hopefully there will be a fragile coalition that to Whitman was symbolic of democracy itself. This is what it means to be democratic, to take unlike elements and get us to stick together, even if only temporarily. This is what a nation is. This is the perfect metaphor of a nation. And what I think all the orators that we mentioned today were about, trying to get their audience, get the ideas of providence, the historical documents sort of undergirding the American experiment, and themselves linked together, formed, even if fragilely, a sort of coalition of like-minded individuals united for a common purpose. All right, well, we thank you for your attention, and we'd love to open up for questions.